Many people have problems with art and not with reality.
So why is art different?
It's pretty simple, right?
This is knowledge, this is thinking, this is thought.
Yeah, it does something strange with your head.
Welcome to the Undergang Armchair.
Bring it.
Welcome to the Undergang Armchair. My name is still Onda. We are back. It's been quite a while, so I think I should probably start out by saying thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for your patience. It has been a long and crazy summer and fall, if I'm to be honest. Without making a bunch of excuses, I will say that the balancing act of creating an exhibition, being a new father, earning enough money to live off of, and running a podcast just all came to a head, and something had to give. But that being said, there's been quite a bit of behind-the-scenes work going on here, all in an effort to make the platform sustainable, so things are actually moving forward. Today we have a conversation I've actually been really excited to share with you guys. It's taken a while, but it's with the artist FOS, also known by his government name of Thomas Poulsen. I recorded this talk during the summer here when he had a really quite ambitious show up at Gallery Nils Stærk. I was here in Copenhagen, and it turned out to be a really fun talk. He's one of the guests who was both really easy and really interesting to speak with, and this is always a great combination when you're talking about a very engaging and expansive work to begin with. It's always a pleasure when the artist feels open to talk about it, and we talked for a long time. It was hard to trim this one down, and I hope it's certainly not the last time, and I hope that you find it as interesting as I did. This episode is brought to you by Artland. It's a platform founded on a vision to connect art collectors, art lovers, galleries, and artists from all over the world into a global art community. They have a great app. They produce a ton of interesting content, and they are in it for all the right reasons. I know them personally. So check it out at artlandapp.com. And a final reminder, remember to check out all the great shows on our platform, Cultural Bandwidth. It may be that I'm not always here, but there's a team of great podcasters making original content about art. It's all home produced, and I know you're going to love it. So check it out at culturalbandwidth.com. And with no further ado, please enjoy my conversation with FOS. Yeah, so that the U.S. has this very poor setup for public funding, but a very rich setup of commissions and donations of works and this whole and that's not very developed here in Denmark.
No,
and that's what she was kind of trying to work on, but it's so ingrained in the culture here that the public takes care of that. Yeah, that it's hard. It's an uphill battle.
And it's been probably a shadow of the cultural work that's been going on. It's been part of the policy and the tradition. But as public funds diminishes and we see all budgets are being cut.
Right, then what?
Of course. Then this shadow part that was once there are just slightly,
Well, I assume the U.S., the American system comes from lack of other option. Yeah. So institutions would court and try to develop these relationships with philanthropists and, magnates. And, it probably goes all the way back to the oil baron and, railroad baron age.
And also run on the personal initiative, of course.
Yeah.
In where, of course, it derives from a more social aspect. And I guess that's also why we've created such a rich welfare state and rich education, that everybody in all classes are sort of well aware of their society and other countries around them. Of course, something is happening these days.
Yeah, and it seems like, Danes are aware, but in a remote way.
Yeah, it's always been autonomous society in that sense that it's been dealing with all its issues in the within. Also, many of the countries around us had a tradition of exploring and also colonialism like Holland and the Sweden has had a long exchange of an exodus, but not Denmark that much.
Well, we just lost every goddamn war for the past 600 years or something.
What, the Americans?
No, the Danes.
Oh, the Danes, yeah, for sure. No, that's for sure.
And that creates kind of a tribal mentality.
Yeah.
It's one of the theories about Jantelo and this whole idea about why are Danes so insular. And the idea is that we had to stick together.
Yeah.
In order to make it, because...
Yeah. And of course it creates like a very consensus-driven society, which on one hand is quite rewarding, and in the other hand you see the lack now, since there's lesser and lesser funds for the institution that keeps people together.
If they keep pumping into the system, it'll work.
Yeah,
as soon as it goes away, then what do we have?
Exactly, because suddenly when ideology is being it's more difficult concept, and ideology is a more difficult. It's more like ideology has been exchanged for radicalism. So people in each end of the scale are more believing in their status rather than what actually are the things that. What is the structures underneath that develops where we are? I think this was maybe a bigger part of the people that govern the society, and unfortunately, this knowledge has also diminished. So, as we see right now, we have the Social Democrats who just went into the populistic agenda by saying now we would be a one party with all the mandate. We're going to do a broad concept, but the people in the society would like a stronger rules for foreigners. Weirdly enough, it's been I'm just going to close this.
Yeah, I forgot to say we have to turn it off because it'll beep too.
Yeah.
Yes, you also have one of those. I have a Nokia, the old one. It's amazing.
Yeah. But it's a little like you have a radio show and you ask the audience to send in their favorite songs, and then after a week, the disc jockey is saying, "Okay, we're stuck because we're playing the same 3 songs.
Right. Nothing is happening.
Nothing is happening because we asked the audience." And in the same way, they've been asking the audience for 10 years that there's this ghost of foreigners. It's never ever discussed what is actually the amount, what is actually the cost, what's actually the true effect of these things. It's always kept as a shadow game. And now the Social Democrats has been, as the last major party, has been falling into this. Of course, you can also say it's plague or cholera, what you want. But of course, you rather want cholera from the Social Democrats than a plague from the right wings.
Well, that and that sort of rhetoric is very populist and right wing too. That's the whole thing about it. Everything's more nuanced. But it's just like when they ask people what percentage of Denmark is foreign born.
Yeah.
People are like 25%, you know, and it's something like 2% or something, it's a negligible number. It's a non-issue essentially.
Yeah, it's a non-issue. I mean, climate change and many other health issues is probably, but I guess that, it's an of course, what we're discussing now is what everybody's discussing, what all newspapers are discussing, because it's not a local issue. It's suddenly you see global tendencies are moving into intimate issues, and that's new.
Yeah.
Before you had a hierarchy, then information got from top to bottom. Now, for many years it's been horizontal. It gives an unease of what's true and false. It pushes what language is about, because no one is keeping up the traditions of what language actually is referring to.
That's a heavy one right there. That one can really be unpacked.
There's a lot
in that,
Yeah,
And you can see that reflected in the art world, actually. There's a lot of interest in semiotics and language, etc.
Yeah. And also poetry, for that matter, has been look like it's getting a rebirth.
That's right. Actually, it's funny. Yeah, actually, you're right. If I just think about like looking at Danish newspaper Politiken or something, you do hear more about poetry than you did 5 years ago.
Yeah. And I guess also then, I mean, we can see this funny issue with this Melania Trump and her "I don't care" jacket is also dealing with language, and it's yeah.
There's a lot of trolling going on too, you could say.
Yeah, there's room for it.
Well, it's just a lot of sword talk, it's constantly like everything is, it's war. It's constantly, you're constantly ready to fight about it instead of like trying to discuss it. Yeah. And then people do coy maneuvers like that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that anyone would be dumb enough to think that jacket wouldn't raise attention.
Yeah. But
regardless of what you meant.
Yeah, but we also know that the level of cultural intelligence there is, I mean, it's completely lacked of. It's
unrefined.
It's very unrefined. It's a little like but what's happening? I mean,
what is happening?
What the fuck is happening? I get the tectonic plates are grunching against each other. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess people's intimate fears of small details, everyday things, has a space to amplify itself in. And of course, it leaves a gap in the political agenda, which is very, very complex to take care of. And then that leaves a quite open space in the political landscape, where we have populists who sees the moment, takes the thing, and of course to create something very complex they use populism and reduction.
They ride the wave
and they amplify all the fears in quite simple maneuvers, which
they're
unfortunately
so good at it. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. But I guess also we tend to react more with these emotions than complex emotions of doubt, and try to decipher what is doubt in a society. What is
why am I afraid right now? Why am I really afraid right now?
Yeah, and of course the collective also has a reducive effect, because it becomes collateral damage almost.
Yeah, there's like kind of a collective PTSD based off of just the current situation. Like nothing's getting better, but the rhetoric keeps going up and everyone's just getting more and more stressed out about it.
But maybe it's also, I mean, from day to night when people are we look at much more images than we actually are touching. And the idea is, and the problem there is also that there is maybe a radicalization in the image, because we use the eye, and the eye in our sensatory mechanism has a distancing effect. We can see ourselves seeing, it creates a distance. The eye is a distant maker, and the ear is relation to closeness. We understand where we are in the space and how the objects are administrated around us. And the touch, of course, moves into our memory, and of course, an intimate closeness. It tickles when it touches the table, and I guess also that now we are in a area, as I mentioned, and as you also said, that before we had something hierarchical, and the information was more trustworthy, also in the community. Now we have images and ideas that can go from global issues to worries in the most intimate detail. So it balances. It not balances, the opposite. It gives us out of balance, and we are experiencing this solely with the eye, right?
Right, which is that distance making. It is that weird performance. You're right. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So
you can't help but think about the internet then.
Of course, and the stimuli that people are getting. I mean, the way people use the image today is in a little way how people. We saw how music was somehow disintegrated, becoming just a part of the space, like a white noise, or we treat it in a very different way in music than we did 10 years ago, I find. Where you had the music as an autonomous issue, the whole album, the cover, now I'm being romantic, but it was an entity for itself.
Right,
that
and
we
it was
could
an
visit.
Action.
It was an action that we could visit. Now it's been sliced up and filled into the gaps where it can stage or amplify a situation, right?
Although images, I assume you're going in that direction. Images now do the same thing. Yeah.
Exactly. That's
so it's like padding. It's the packing peanuts of modern life.
Yeah, and there we also get closer to the artistic expression, which uses various images to juxtapose a specific poetic reference. And this is actually what people are doing when they use their, long finger, scrolling through, using their pieces of glass and scrolling through, I don't know what else could be, all these social media sites that are packed with. It's exactly the same thing. It's a juxtaposition of all human emotions. So it's like this cabinet of curiosities that also was the pretext for the museum.
The Wunderkammer.
The Wunderkammer. And in German, the Kuriositätenkabinetten. It's a wonderful word. Yeah. And that was a frame in where things not seen, life and death, were expressed in that cabinet. And now we have YouTube. So
it's even more horrifying.
It's an endless. It's what's interesting is this. Suddenly we've introduced infinity. We had infinity, and that was God's issue. And we could, it sort of stopped in the church, and he would deal with infinity somehow. Of course, certain religions use infinity in a way of focusing oneself maybe. But now we have the concept of infinity in our pockets. And it's very easy to sit, and we all do it. Well, certain people does it more than others. But this idea of moving into this vast space on infinite images, right?
And you just tap in.
And it's a lot of skins with ghost as content. And of course we feel sometimes we feel enlightened, and there are interesting jumps, but but I guess it's the new way. It's a new evolution. I don't know what to say about it. It's because of course it goes in and does something to our society. And maybe the good thing about it is that now it acts as a nervous network, we have all the nerves in the body that deals with touch and infections. And now we have the nerves from Washington to North Korea, and they can actually, touch the end of their nerves. They can just touch them, and small sparks and nights. But that has nothing to do with nuclear war and armed forces. And
has to do with meat bodies.
Yeah, something. At least you could say. It's a lot of sort of rhetoric and intentions that is being, as it is right now, and it almost seen as a simulacrum that it's actually real politics, because it all exists.
And most people would think it is.
Yeah, you could probably have some people believing in that too, that it's a pure performance, which it is. And it's weird how this way of touching each other with this kind of nervous system, with this platform in itself is a different way. It's also a language, an image language, right? And we can maybe say, okay, I made an exhibition here. We're sitting in a gallery. People have their phones. They have an Instagram profile. The Instagram has a specific language towards images, and that language takes over people's way of looking at things. Now let me just be pessimistic for a second.
You are welcome.
Because then they are looking in the eye as the phone, as a journalist look always at the story, or the fireman looks at the fire, wants the fire to happen. And in this show, there is a part which is an active show, an active part of otherwise a very passive installation. And that has been a part of my practice for many, many years, this part of the active. And now, because of this digitalization of the social, suddenly the active part is being treated as a language of Instagram. So my point is sort of being erased somehow, because what I'm trying to explain here for the people without eyes in this interview is that there is a box of sand. It's a hot box of sand, and this is also the idea of experiencing something with other than the face and the senses. Is like trying to give the person a double skin. Like this is what we actually do every day. It's a negotiation of objects that is enclosed in materials that we have formulated in our cultural language. Of course, we can skip that and just go into a forest. Then you have it unfold the materials for its own use and their own logic. But we humans, we tend to use them and benefit from their qualities, and we make them into chairs and insulators and whatever. And then they speak inside their function. The wooden door speak, the aluminium profiles speak. And that's how we somehow also negotiate. And we negotiate it in a way that how our psychological temperament is being displayed in all these different materials. And that's sort of the idea of this double skin. Taking it a bit further, you submerge into the door, you submerge into the table, you submerge into the sand, which is here in this exhibition. And there, of course, it's a different stimuli than the eye and the ear and the nose. It's the body that is being stimulated with information. Because when people are submerged in the sand, of course, the blood streams are being pushed and the blood needs to pump. And then suddenly all the nerves are ignited somehow.
It activates your body in a way.
It activates your body, yeah. And this is, of course, part of my overall practice, and specifically to this show that I'm sure we're going to talk more about. But here you go with the idea that Instagram circumvent that.
Right, it's
monologue.
It's a video at best.
Yeah, exactly. It goes in and it slices up, takes a little piece of it that is useful in the waterfall of images that one experience going through them. Yeah. And of course, what it also it castrates, of course, the feeling of the image. It creates a monochrome of style. And of course, this delivers an interesting question for the artists that has been doing this all their lives.
Yeah, and that's the question I kind of have to bring in more into like the personal, is how much that kind of affects, because I can say personally, I'm just the right generation to have grown up without the internet, or at least there was one computer in the classroom kind of deal. And then watching how it appears that a lot of art actually functions better online than it does in real life.
Yeah, of course.
That seems to be a really common thing I'm starting to kind of react to. And it's not even Instagram, it's also a PDF you might get from a gallery or something like that, and you think, damn, that looks really good.
Yeah. But as you say, it looks good. And that's what I talk about, this idea of monochrome images, that as I've seen, my friend has a new iPhone, and the way I wouldn't even be able to sit with a bad image and do that in Photoshop. It's so digitally improved to satisfy my eye.
Yeah.
And
it's lekker, as they say in
lekker.
It's delicious.
It just looks delicious, but that actually devour the poetic. It devours the asymmetric sensatory thing that can happen experiencing it. Of course, we also right now in our conversation may be confusing two subject matters, because one is also the feeling we get tapping into this vast digital universe, and we sort of feel a specific weight and something confusing, and I'm sure everybody else does that, because it's this infinite notion that you feel when you go into it. You don't know actually if this content is for you. You feel like you are borrowing it, or you're sneaking in and looking at someone else's television.
Voyeuristic.
It has a voyeuristic thing to it. That's one issue, and that's one way that we're now, maybe our generation talks about it in this manner, because we've seen it, grow into us, in where the next generation, where that's status quo maybe. But that's one part, and the other part, of course, is also living it. You are in a space, you're looking at it, and then you are actually getting something different. And that's not to forget. I mean, that's why we're still here.
Yeah.
Because who would like to make PDFs?
Right. Well, I think it's the thing that's fascinating to me about all this is, coming from the outside. I have to admit, I'm not super aware of your practice.
No, but that's good.
Yeah, I think that is good, and I'm glad that you say that, actually. But it's fascinating, and it's also almost impossible to figure out the timeline. I try to work backwards. If I'm going to talk to you, I think, okay, where does this come from? Where did he develop this? And this show is so refined and so finished and so well thought out. I'm curious where it begins. Like, where, if you look back 20 years ago, where does it, did you start out painting? Did you?
Yeah, I actually started out painting. That's how I got into the academy. That's where it started.
Here in Copenhagen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've actually never moved it that much around. I mean, I do travel a lot, but I haven't had as many. The younger generation takes some years in a different academy.
Sure, but they go to Glasgow or
Germany.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't go to Paraguay yet, but that's going to be the next generation.
But I mean, I'm just really, I'm very interested. Just the type of person I am. I always want to take things apart.
Yeah,
and see what's in there.
Yeah.
And
it's a very American approach, actually.
Maybe it is, yeah.
Yeah, I find it. I mean, because when you go, not to not answer your question, but if you go into, you want a tutorial on YouTube, I always want to find a British than an American, because it's always, hi guys, this is Dylan talking. Now we're going to do this. And I'm sitting in front of a computer, and then it takes almost a minute and a half before we get to what the content is about.
Right. Just because we can't shut up. We cannot shut up.
They know how to rap. I mean, you can say one thing about it is that it becomes so tedious that they become so good at it. So they really know what they're talking about. And that's why also that this ingenuity is such a vivid part of the collective mind of the America. And that's also why the idea is the infinite. I mean, that's also very fascinating. That's the wonderful facets of the American culture.
A vivid excess.
Very vivid asset, also because it's not been enclosed in a social welfare that retains this. So,
right.
I mean,
or blocks it. You know, in a way, there's
here it blocks it, and over there it needs to work, otherwise you're gonna fucking die. So there's a gun to the head, which of course has a good. Anyway, to answer your question, I think I work very much like a rock what is it called? The Rorschach test?
Rorschach test.
Yeah. Maybe that could be used as an analogy. So the first drop of paint being squished between two pieces of paper, it becomes an image. On the left side of that butterfly or whatever it looks like, you take another piece of paper and squish that in, and now you have a mark from the previous page, and you fold that page, and you continuously do that. It's a little how I feel that the things are folded and imprints into the next footstep, so to speak.
What's the first drop?
I guess the first drop, of course, is me not stopping drawing when I was a child, I guess. There's nothing where it sort of starts. It's a little like where does the plant start when you put in the seed. I mean, it's very evolutionary.
So every time you put something out there, it's just here we are today, bam, and then it's all a straight line essentially. Maybe not straight, but it's all connected.
It's all straight line. Maybe the fourth year in the academy, I had to say to myself, maybe I'm actually an artist. So it came to me in the middle of my academic times that's probably what I was. I hadn't even thought about it.
Even though you'd been at art school for a number
even
of
that
years.
I hadn't stopped. Even though that I was in a studio after school, after high school.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah. A very specific way of Danish education. That's
I've explained it on the show.
Into the cultural heritage or.
It's actually amazing. The short version of it is that it's education for the sake of education.
Yeah.
There's
and public health.
Yeah.
Like mentality. Public mentality.
Available to everybody.
Yeah.
The idea is you can better yourself.
Yeah. So it's like trying to get normal social skills, and I guess that's one of the main things through different kinds of education, like song, dance. Anyhow.
You realized that you were an artist.
Yeah, and maybe this comes down to that certain people have goals that they put in front of themselves. And I guess I haven't had much goals, but I didn't say no. If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and it's actually very relevant to my life right now because I'm struggling to keep the original impetus alive. You know what I mean? Like you get these goals, like I want to support myself, or like I want to make more art.
Goal.
It is, but the whole thing comes from I want to make art, and then it becomes I want to survive off of making art. Yeah. And those are two very, very different things.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. Like you start boxing yourself in.
Yeah.
And you start making decisions.
But one definitely needs to forget one part, and that's the surviving. Otherwise, the other thing can't exist. And then one have to put oneself into it, and then the work themselves have to grow and create the potentiality, and not you as a person. I guess that's the other thing is becomes very constructed, and it would also be in a maybe it's easy to give advice, right?
Of course.
But I'm just saying that. I would like to survive, and I would also like to make art. Surviving, of course, creates economy, and economy creates practice and organization and goals. And of course, I'm saying that one can't, of course, it's impossible to take one part out of it, but you take on yourself both tasks. By saying, okay, I know that I am would like to survive, but then I need to focus on my work, and the work itself have to take on that task.
And they don't have the answer to anything.
Yeah. And I guess that, and because that you already know that you have to survive, I'm sure that there are certain compass needles in going left or right that are going to choose how you're going to use the medium or the material or the time or blah, 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 blah. But that's also as just embedded in it.
But I think the thing about that is that you have to trust in the work, in that sense.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
And that's where I'm having
the work.
You do, and that's the problem I'm having right now is because I'm just trying to think like, okay, I just recently became a father, I have a rent, all that bullshit.
Yeah.
And then you have to kind of like retain the goal you had as a 17-year-old, or at least the respect for the work. You know, the work it didn't have to explain itself in any way, shape, or form.
No. And that's also because that your life was filled with play. Now now reality has kicked in, and the self has been reduced, and now one have to deal with what was one's interest and have to convert it into reality to. Like tough choices as it is to make tough choices being a father. So in that way, of course, it's a wonderful and natural transition. And of course, it's a very difficult one because one does not have this. Well, I'm kicking in an open door when we're discussing this because I'm sure that, I mean, everybody who, well, especially with art, because it's not a 9-to-5 thing. It's part of one's character that needs to be taken care of, so I understand why it's
but it seems like you didn't have ever that limit, or you had enough respect. You say you realized at a certain point that you had enough there was no goals. I believe that was the word you used. It didn't have a goal in and of itself. And I think that is a trend tremendously freeing, because I've spent a lot of time being like, this is what I do, and then years later realizing, why did I put that lid on it? There's no reason to contain it. And the more time you have with things in the open, the more they have their own life.
And also you have more openings for your surroundings to engage.
Exactly.
But I guess also has something to do with character, because it's not because I'm the most organized character. I mean, there's a Yiddish expression which I use a lot, which is called schlumpedieke. Schlumpedieke. One can almost hear how a schlumpedieke comes into the world and how he's dressed and how he deals with his attire and his surroundings. So
Yiddish is amazing like that. Like the word for sweating is schwitzing, which has to be the greatest word for sweating. I am schwitzing. Oy vey, I am schwitzing.
Oh, I am schwitzing, exactly. So that's very true. Because of course, as one is very organized, one also gets very far from it, because they can, with their determination, say, I would like to have achieved this by then, and then I need to go do that,
project managing,
something like this.
Yeah, but I mean, let's talk about the ideas, because it is very idea driven, and the thing I'll just say it straight up, I'm in awe of your ability to build up these concepts, because it is so. I'm almost afraid of your work. If I'm going to be completely honest, it almost inspires fear in me, because you have such a huge level of understanding of your own vision of this work that it goes beyond any sort of I don't know. I don't want to say common language, because it is about common language, but it's so refined that I have a hard time understanding it.
Well, I'm glad you say it, because I'm lacking response. I've been working, it's the first time I do a solo show for 2 years, and you work very hard to somehow gather yourself again, like riding a bike, and then working a lot, investing a lot of time. You deliver the show, and then it's just Tuesday.
The gaping void.
But this one has been gaping like from here to, I don't know, Østerbro, which is far from here. So I'm very happy that you like the show. I am very glad that you.
But that's also, I mean, not to toot my own horn here, but that's what the show's about, because the discussions about this show, the program, the discussions about art after it's hanging on the walls tend to be dead. Great show, let's go to the bar.
Exactly.
And it's just kind of like, you motherfucker, I just put 2 years of my life into this. I can't, you don't even know how to deal with the emptiness.
Yeah. Well, that's why I am taking it with open arms. But maybe I should, before we go into the show, just explain for the listener what the show is about, because I guess that's the main.
That's what I want to hear personally. Yeah. Also,
so as I explained earlier, this Rorschach test. The last show, maybe one should then have to explain to understand this show. was that it was a show in the ICA in London. It was called Maggie Margaret Lives. It was a show where some objects and designs had an interior, the space had an interior feeling, and in there was a character called Maggie Margaret, an actor. And we made a script, and the script is her walking around reciting something, and if one understands that it's a woman, she's in her house, she hasn't left the house because of some family tragedy, she's depressed. And when people are depressed, they maybe sleep a lot. The bright light is annoying. One sensatory thing is sort of a little misguided, out of scale. Small things become big things and so on. So instead of looking at it as because basically, depression is also that your experience, the accumulated experience you have in your body is a way of dealing with the future, and you are in a future where these mechanisms don't help you. You don't have the tools of life experience to exchange a meaning out of it, or you got into a shock, or somehow your body doesn't know how to answer the question. So you fall into a weird void, and maybe that void is where you actually can talk to objects. So you can actually speak. People literally, if they continue, they start to speak with their chairs and plants and whatever. So the show was about this idea about that we are in a psychological fragile state, and instead of looking at it as a disease, it's a place in where this woman actually starts to become the tonehoved, like the as in old tape recorders, you had this little thing that actually was called a tonehoved, where the cassette tape was running over it and it talked.
Oh, so it was actually the part that read the tape.
Exactly.
I don't know what that's called.
A tone head.
Tone head. That's what it's called.
Let's call it a tone head. So she became the voice of the objects. Okay, that was that. This show, it's awful long sentences. I unfortunately have a tradition of talking a lot. When I speak about my work, it becomes very tedious, I could imagine, for a listener. But
don't worry about it. That's all I'll say.
So this version is you are submerged into the surface of the object. I guess that show and this show is still the idea of negotiating with the object. As we talked about earlier in our discussion here, we are constantly negotiating with the objects. Nat, who sits outside the window, he is holding his iPhone, he's touching the mouse, and he's looking at the screen. So it's three, and there's another computer there. So that is really negotiating with objects. So this is what we're doing.
On a pretty high level, actually.
On a pretty high level, exactly. It's a very head-based thing. So this is why the sand part comes in. So to describe the space, you enter a space and it's been made into a place that is not this specific space, but a potential place somewhere. And there are certain elements that indicate that. For instance, the walls has this sort of, it's like a signs. It's actually sod. No, not sod. Soot. That was
like charcoal, like from
charcoal,
burned wood.
Exactly.
Yeah, soot.
Yeah. Which has this sort of a little sign. It reminds me of language maybe that's used. Then there's a big sandbox. There is there's no light in the gallery, but what makes the light is a big light panel that is hovering above this sand pit, which is heated. And then there are these I guess there's going to be images for this, so people.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to describe it and put some images up.
Yeah,
because it's a little
I don't
hard.
need to talk about that. So there is that place. The exhibition is called Palimpsest, and the word palimpsest, it's description of old like papyrus, old writing mediums, from the Romans to the Egyptians to old scrolls. They had some very valuable mediums that they were writing their texts on. And the palimpsest means actually scrape again. So like lemon zest. That's like squeeze or scrape, right? And again, palim. So it means that they had this way of scraping off the narrative, and then they could rewrite something new. You could also say
That's
that
poetic.
Yeah, I find it quite beautiful. Yeah. I had a long time where I felt this palimpsest. It sounded a little like incest or pest, or it didn't. But the more I've been using the word, the better I like it.
It's evocative in and of itself. Just though, just like we're talking about Yiddish words sound like the things they are. It's evocative, and you like that also. Gestalt is another word that you use, which is similar.
Exactly.
They're alive in that sense. You can feel them. You can taste them.
Yes, palimpsest. You can really feel this word. So you can also use it as a city of palimpsest, like building has been torn down, something new has been erected on top of the ruins of something else. And then, of course, the question about, does the next building experience the ruin? And these questions that we all also put in these mythologies that we ourselves put into souvenirs or to, reliquiums. In the old days, where the one that had the most were closest to God, because all the bones from the saints represented a connection to God. So the churches was battling of how many of those reliquiums they could have. So that's also a strong, that's like a capitalistic race of objects.
I have the most bones, motherfucker.
Exactly. I'm closest to God. So here, as I say, we have negotiating with an object, of course, is divided in three. You are there, the object is there, and that's divided in two. It's because it's the surface and the material itself, right? So the double skin, you go into the sand, you're submerged in the sand, and suddenly the sand it's a different skin on top of you. You have this double skin, and this doubleness is a big part of the show, I feel. Many of the objects is mirrored by themselves. There are two small identical bronze sculptures. There are some photos of these tubes, glass tubes, on aluminium, and one recognizes the shadow as the object. And when you get closer to them, you see that there is the actual... So it's actually the ghost of the object is more clear. When we talked about politics earlier in our little conversation, that the ghosts of the immigrants, the ghost of all the other things are more vivid to our imagination than the actual thing.
Right.
So all these things that I'm talking about now is what one object inspires the next object, and those are engines to produce aesthetics. And those aesthetics, they are forged, is that the word? Through this logic. So they are outside of any other reasoning of producing objects. Like microphones, Instagram profiles, aluminium things, chairs, tables, all these things. And that's what, of course, the artistic thing is about, right? To forge things not seen, or referring to objects that we almost understand. Finding the engines of breaking the idea of aesthetics. Of course, I feel, and maybe this I'm using maybe I haven't understood it properly yet, but it feels like that there is a freight train of images or a mass that is moving faster and faster somehow. And of course, then I have to go slower and slower.
When you say, of course, why?
It's because that it feels that the image and style, as we spoke about earlier, how music, that usually music were very much part of a social agenda, social values, and they fed off each other. The market would use this new language to put a pair of editors inside the mix. And the same thing goes now for the images. I feel somehow that if I was just, my friend had a phone and said, there's something of your stuff on Instagram. And we looked through it. And yes, there was one piece of mine, but in the sea of those images, it had no meaning. It could be anything. It could be a doorknob.
Especially your work. Yeah, absolutely.
So so that means that this monochrome of aesthetics, that it takes everything, it's like service to all, service to none. And I maybe it's my generation, have a hard time deciphering and reaching the quality of what the object have to learn, to teach me. Because when I'm saying that we all negotiate with objects, it's because the objects are here to teach us something. Art is here to teach us something, and the material in itself, now you are a father, the first thing that are happening is not language, but it's the taste of materials. Right? Take things in your mouth, touching, tasting, touching. So that's the first thing, the first negotiation before language. So we are creatures of language, but underneath this, it's the object.
That comes much later in reality, the language.
Yeah. And but the language makes us survive. But that's also a gestalt for the actual experience of the object, right? And of course, since there's so much focus on the eye, as there is these days, the teachings of the objects becomes less visible, I would say. But now I'm running away from what the show is about. That's exactly what I'm saying, like run.
It's amazing. It's amazing because, let me put it this way. When I interviewed Lawrence Weiner or had him on the show, he hated me because I wanted to talk about why he does what he does. And he wanted to talk about the meaning of the clouds when the sun shines on them in a certain way.
Of course, yeah.
So I love the fact that we just run, you just take it and run because your work is open-ended and not at the same time.
Yeah.
And the material, the way that your language expresses itself into materials is what fascinates me. Yeah. I'm very material based myself. And I think this level of language that you've built up around it is fascinating. Yeah. It's amazing. And of course your ideas have to be all sorts of bananas and out there to have it. But how do you put it down then? Because you can talk obviously a long time about it, but when you come down to I need to make a picture on a piece of metal. Where is that bridge?
Yeah. I mean I had the image of the tubes somehow. I saw a sculpture of tubes, and I felt that this glass tube fitted nicely in depicting the idea of this internal circulation.
Can you just feel it?
It just makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, of course, when you are making a show, it's always a resonance between a feeling of what the show should be. You're trying to find some, and there is an object that is vital. You start out with that image, which in this case was the sand. And of course and then I made the book, this Gestalt book you referred to, where I had this guy who is one of the engineers of the chips of, what are they called? Intel.
Microprocessors.
Microprocessors, yeah, which of course is also a silica that is the basic, which is, weird idea that imagine the beach, the silica, and which is both the most banal, the concrete and the microchip. In that sense, it's such a poetic world that exists. And then also I would like something cold in the show. So that's where the aluminium comes in. And also adds to a more digital or a more electronic reference than sand and concrete and glass and ceramics and wood and fabric and photogravure and wooden frames.
LED lights, kimonos.
And then you have the bench, which is concrete, wood, fabric. It's like these basic materials. And the basic materials that I use, I try to have them be raw, as we talked about, where they're not enclosed. I like the idea of many small. Early on, I was very interested idea about structures and systems. And systems, of course, is many isolated elements, and together they create a system. Like sociality, like an ant, like whatever in the universe, I guess, is that. And therefore, the first exhibitions I used was like, I made a pavilion where I had like a roof of pine leaves. There were these haystack chairs. The idea if you have all these straw together, they make a mass. The table, the stool or the little table that's in this room here. The base is concrete where you have many small elements of sand and together they create a material. So that's why this image here, it's salt, which is of course again many elements and together they merge a material. So maybe I think that's a big part of my practice.
Is the giving space for it to live on its own, almost, this material.
Yeah. It's not. It doesn't want to be something that it isn't. It would like to. Like there's an image here that uses fabric, but it's a graphic image. It's a graphic. It's the strings are used to create a specific surfing for a piece of graphic. Here I would like, it's part of a design, but it's very much concrete, or it's an image where it's the salt itself that's the image.
But it's always in relation to you/us.
Yeah, because there's an undercurrent in the whole thing, even this palimpsest that we've forgotten to explain about. But there's an undercurrent in all the things I do, and I guess that is the relationship with us and the materials, because the materials is also structuring us socially. And
what they mean, what they signal,
they are the ones that are framing us in our values, our habits, our traditions, our language. It's the spaces we make outside nature. We use architecture to stop the space. We use design to make a utilitarian space of speed and slow and functionality. That functionality is merged into how we negotiate that space, and then of course why I'm very much interested in design and architecture. Now I've been working very much the last 3-4 years with design. Design has always been part of my work, but design, I've been making these design elements for this French company called Céline. And what was great about that opportunity was that I've always used design to create a space and being a platform of the object. And after that, they had no right anymore, because the art world doesn't really look at the design as a valid object.
Right, it's a red-headed stepchild.
It really is. It gets the best place in the storage.
Yeah. Well, they are very designed, and I think that's what I mean also when I say that they're very finished.
Yeah.
And in the course of the last few minutes of you talking, I got about 1,400 questions that came up. So, I'm just going to have to choose one and go with it. There's so many different directions to go in. Yeah. But I always kind of go back to the process of making again. And I'm curious if you do actually do any hands-on building.
I mean, everything I do, I sit and do a prototype and develop a prototype like any other designer, industrial designer, and artist is touching the thing, the mask down there. It's you all of these things is something you touched, and
that's important for the creation. They wouldn't exist as they are without that.
Exactly, and it's a funny dilemma I'm in, because this is the tradition I'm brought into, and you are inspired of how art moves to the future, and it on one hand would like to take the hand away, because it would like to express the digitalized reality we're living in, and then they always have some elements of the touch.
Well, I mean, your show took a lot of people to make, right? I mean, I actually happened to be here while they were building it up, and there was plumbers. Yeah. There was a team of people, cutting a hole in the wall. Yeah. There was all sorts of stuff happening, which it would have taken you a year to do it on your own, if not more.
That's for sure. I'm very happy that there was a team.
But that also creates a certain kind of object. And again, it's that finishedness, I mean.
Yeah.
As opposed to standing there with a lump of clay.
Yeah.
Which you do, but then you also put LED lights over it or make
it becomes this aquarium, so it becomes more, and it as for me, it refers to this more internalized organ or something like that.
But what about bad ideas? What does it look like? What does the show that didn't get made look like?
Yeah, that's the one that we, through experience, luckily, I mean, we are evolutionary beings. And in nature, they start with one football team and end with 100 football teams. And us humans, we start with 100 football teams and end with one. So we're really moving. We go the opposite direction. Every generation becomes wiser and wiser. So it's just part of evolution, I guess.
Yeah, because I mean, my problem would be that I would make things that were too obvious.
Yeah.
And that's that weird line is like, what is the language I'm using?
Yeah.
And that comes from practice, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not actually conceptual. You would argue, or some people would argue, you read a lot of books and do a lot of theory, and then the idea comes out fully formed.
Yeah.
But just like throwing a pot or building a chair, the more times you do it, the more refined it becomes, and the better you become at it. And
of course.
And using it as a tool.
Yes, that's a very human development thing.
Do you do research? Do you read?
Not enough, but research, yes, of course. What's the time, by the way? Do you know?
We go as long as until one of us taps out.
Yeah, no. I can I can continue. I'm just thinking of the poor listeners' ears, saying, "Okay, that was a lot of stuff."
Yeah, I think. Well, here, let me make it practical then. I think this is helpful because I think of me 10 years ago and the way I tried to develop a language and a way of working and that whole thing, and I needed this kind of discussion to understand that I was limiting myself.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And
but then this is perfect because I am doing the exact opposite. When I do the show like this. It's like an eggshell, and then when it breaks, one object refers suddenly to a new one, and it is like sociality.
It's like this in a way.
Yes, it moves very, very fast, and suddenly I have, so much more that I took out in the end. Mm-hmm. So much more, sort of the whole glass department, some vitrines, and there was many other roads that I would have liked to go in. But then you have reality that has a certain space, and you only know that each object has inherited a space, right? Yeah. Each object has its inherent scale and space. It needs a certain room, a volume to exist. So it helps me, the space in a way helps me to choose which things.
And for the love of God, you have to do something at some point. You can't, you know what I mean? Like you have to cut it down.
Yeah.
I have that problem. I work mostly with photography. I've done projects where I've shot 1,000 pictures or 1,000 rolls and then been like, how the fuck do I make 20 images out of this?
Yeah,
and that's the problem. You don't know what you're actually trying to do.
No.
You're just doing it.
Yeah.
And that's where the practice has to inform the practice.
Yeah, you need an opposite. You need a moral compass.
an artistic moral compass.
An artistic moral compass that sets out for a specific narrative, because that's what morals do, right? And that narrative needs to resonate with the quantity of this nihilistic, like just, anything goes almost.
Right. It's all meaningless.
It's all meaningless. I'll just do 1,000. Why not? It could have been 2. So I guess the negotiation between these two poles starts a third thing. And that's what I want to say, that this is exactly same with sociality. You are by yourself. Another person comes, a third thing appears, and that's the situation. So I guess I had my first thing, other things developed, and then from the first thing, a situation arrived. And then how do you negotiate that third thing? I think it's so wonderful and amazing, this idea about like from all this noise of nothing to something, that now there is a show of objects, there is a narrative happening in this gallery, and it's quite extraordinary out of course, references, which is the material. But this long struggle of negotiating these references, converting them into a certain need, and what the space need, and what my expectations of the future are. All these 3 elements merged and made this show. So
it's kind of a miracle.
It's a miracle. It's a wonderful, it's a beautiful, wonderful miracle that of course, and as we start this conversation about it, as it's this miracle and the light, explosion of light that it creates, of just disappears in this ocean of, alleged miracles.
The gaping, howling void.
Yes. So, and of course, I would also like other people to say, okay, this is really it's fantastic, existential, and this is where the quality of art is so vital for our society, because when things are complex and we use the eye, as we talked about, to distance ourselves, there's nothing like internalizing yourself for an idea. Because when you do it, you need to understand, to make a good idea, that you are a body in a space, and you need to deep into it. So there you are slowing down yourself. And this is what's needed in an overheated society. So it's very simple, and it's unfortunate when the knowledge of this existential practice is lost from the public sphere. It has been a public part of the public language here in Denmark. Of course, I find it very sad that this knowledge disappears, so people don't know that there is actually a cure somehow. I'm not saying art is a cure, but the existential practice that it holds is a cure for an overheated society.
Whatever form that might take.
Whatever form that might take, that's for sure.
I think we did it.
Yeah, I think that's a nice...
that's a good way to tie it up.
I think it's a nice way of tying it up, because that is basically the need of it.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's important to experience it.
Well, you make it sound easy.
I think it is easy in the end.
Yeah.
It's just when there's a lot of winds and you get dust in the eyes, you can't see the landscape. But if you have some goggles on, it suddenly just looks like a landscape, I guess.
Well, as they say in Danish, god vind.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, man. Thanks for your time.
You're very welcome. But it's always nice to have a discussion.
to talk
I
some
miss
shit.
it.
I miss it too. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Undergang Armchair. The intro and outro music was kindly provided by Johnny Ripper, and today's interstitial music was provided by David Hyde. You can find links to their music and tons of other conversations with great people on our after party of a website, culturalbandwidth.com. If you do like the show, please just take a quick moment to leave a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It'll help others find us. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back soon.